Are you ready? Good evening and welcome to the 2019 Doctoral Hooding Ceremony. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the wonderful music provided by the University of Mississippi Brass Quintet with Dr. John Shishelin and Jesse Gibbons on trumpet, Dr. Robert Gilbert on horn, Dr. Michael Worthy on trombone, and Dr. Micah Everett on tuba. Please join me in thanking them. My name is Annette Cluck, and it is my honor and distinct pleasure to serve as the Dean of the Graduate School at the University of Mississippi. I am very happy to be here with you to celebrate and honor your considerable achievement. Earning a doctoral degree is a rare and tremendous accomplishment. Today, you join an exclusive group of individuals. The degree you earn today requires intellectual acuity, patience, determination, and creativity. It is the highest academic credential, and you will now have that credential forever. When you decided to pursue your doctoral studies, you made a choice. Clearly, all of you are bright, and you probably had a lot of options for institutions that you could have attended. And you chose us. Your decision to study at the University of Mississippi forever connects you to this fine institution. You will always list this university on your CV. You will always be an academic child of your advisor and mentors. You are a success, and we are honored to be able to count you as one of our successes. Thank you for choosing the University of Mississippi for your doctoral studies. Now, I know the path to the doctoral degree can be difficult and rough, and it requires a lot of support. So as we celebrate the achievements of these candidates, it is only fitting that we recognize the various individuals who have directly supported the students we honor tonight. First, I would like to acknowledge the work of the faculty. Without faculty, we would not have doctoral programs or students. They work tirelessly to support the success of students and directly contribute to the building of the academic family here at the University of Mississippi. Will all members of the graduate faculty, including those seated behind me, please stand so that we can recognize you. Please join me in thanking them. Earning a doctoral degree takes sacrifice and extensive dedicated time away from loved ones. It was only those truly understanding people in your life who were able to patiently understand the commitments you made and to continue to support and sustain you in whatever way they could. While you studied, you experimented, you created, you innovated, and you excelled. Doctoral graduates, I believe that it is critical that we take the time to recognize those loved ones who helped you earn this degree. I ask that all grandparents, spouses, parents, children, siblings, in-laws, other relatives, peers, and friends stand and be recognized so that our graduates can thank you. I would now like to take a moment to introduce several members of the platform party. The various schools and the College of the University of Mississippi, whose faculty members mentor doctoral students, are headed by our academic deans. I will now ask these deans to stand as I call their names. Dr. Lee Cohen, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. Dr. Dave Palayo, Dean of the School of Engineering. Dr. David Allen, Dean of the School of Pharmacy. Dr. David Rock, Dean of the School of Education. Dr. Ken Syree, Dean of the School of Business Administration. Dr. Mark Wilder, Dean of the Patterson School of Accountancy. and Dr. Peter Grandjean, Dean of the School of Applied Sciences. There are a few other members of the platform party that I'd like to introduce at this time. These individuals serve as key officers of the university and deans of other academic units here on campus. Again, please stand as I call your name. Dr. Noel Wilkin, Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. Dr. Josh Gladden, Vice Chancellor for Research and Sponsored Programs. Dr. Brandy Hepner-LeBanc, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs. Dr. Donna Strum, Associate Provost. Dr. Richard Forget, Associate Provost. Cecilia Botero, Dean of the Library. Dr. Tony Amateur, Dean of General Studies and Associate Provost. Dr. Will Norton, Dean of the School of Journalism and New Media. And Dr. Douglas Sullivan Gonzalez, Dean of the Honors College. Thank you. Later on in the program, I'll introduce the remaining members of the platform party as they come to help us with our ceremony. Before I continue on to placing of the doctoral hoods, I would like to introduce two doctoral students. Each year, the graduate school selects two outstanding doctoral students to serve as our graduate class marshals. This year, we had a particularly competitive group of nominees, and it was a very hard decision. Our 2019 graduate marshals are Zenithia Barnett and Martha Monroe. We now ask they're going to provide some remarks that I think will be inspiring and very meaningful to all of us.
Thank you, Dr. Cluck. And thank you to the faculty, administration, and staff of the University of Mississippi, to all the parents, friends, relatives, alumni, and to the class of 2019. I'm honored to represent the graduate school and my peers as your class marshal, and I'm eternally grateful to be able to share with you today. I want to first share a poem with you. Once upon a time, there was an African-American girl who was very adventurous and wanted to travel the world. She enjoyed fishing, climbing trees, and summers on the beach, and she loved putting on shows for everyone to see. She was often called the wild child, or Miss Drama Queen, who talked a lot but was very smart. She never set limits or boundaries, but she never had a dream job, you see, because the normal jobs weren't what she wanted to be. But soon she found out that there were so many possibilities, and an aquatic biologist became the thing that she wanted to be. But little did she know that for this career, she'd have to do a lot to overcome her fears. She'd have to grow a layer of skin thick enough to not break her heart, and later recognize that she was set apart. You're not white or male, and working in water, what about your hair? Do blacks even know how to swim? How will you compete with them? Were a part of her thoughts and things she would hear in subtle ways year after year. So what's this little girl to do? What will she do to make it through? How can she turn those frowns into nods? How will she defeat the odds? Because what she's dreamed to be is seen as an anomaly. So clearly this isn't a fairy tale. My name is Zenithia Barnett, and I'm receiving my doctorates in biological sciences with plans to practice as an aquatic biologist. I'm the first person in my family to receive their doctorate's degree, and I believe only the third African American to receive their doctorates in biological sciences at the University of Mississippi. So again, I'm honored to stand here as a manifestation of love and pain. I stand on the backs of my numerous ancestors who had little to no opportunities. My past alone will not let me sit still, so I strive to make an impact in this world. Just as the little girl in the poem, many of us have struggled to defeat the odds and accomplish our goals. And today we are here because our hard work, our long nights, our tears, our family support, and our committee support has paid off. We've completed one huge milestone, and I stand here to say congratulations. But our work has just begun. Despite our accomplishments, discrimination is still a blight upon our otherwise great nation. Discrimination of race, sex, sexual orientation, and numerous other things. It will take our work, our success, our ability to be a positive example and pull others up with us to make this change. We have to be the thorn in the side of injustice, a disruptive distraction beyond the curriculum, beyond the standards, beyond poverty, and beyond privilege. We have to be like the ant. Proverbs 6:6-8 reads, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It had no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest." The ant is a small animal in a colony with numerous others who have all different tasks, but it takes the work of all the ants for the colony to function properly. The ant has to be responsible, resilient, and reliable. It has to keep the greater good of the entire colony in mind. It cannot simply think about self, but the ant also shows us to feel superior despite of. Regardless of the ant's size or how insignificant its job may seem, the colony is able to thrive because everyone in the colony works together. So just as the ant, we must approach every situation like we've already won. We must stop making excuses, be intentional about what we do, work together for the greater good, and use our differences to our advantage. So my fellow graduates, as we don our hoods, accept our diplomas, and make our way in this world, we must think back to our passions, which drove us to endure the countless hours of studying, time in the lab and in the field, and remind ourselves that we have what it takes to make a difference in the world, and through us, there will be change. Thank you.
Good evening. Let me take this opportunity to extend my sincere congratulations to each doctoral graduate and to their families and friends who celebrate this very special occasion. This ceremony is the culmination of your educational journey, beginning in preschool to now with the completion of your studies. Step by step, you have achieved personal goals that have brought you to this important moment. Considering the fact that only 2% of the people living in the United States ever receive a doctoral degree, for me and probably for most of you, this is the achievement of a lifelong goal. I received my Bachelor of Music Education degree from Ole Miss in 1972. And later received my Master of Music degree. I then began my doctoral work in 1975. Because of several circumstances, I did not have the opportunity to finish my degree at that time. After a rewarding teaching career spanning over 45 years, I still wanted to complete my terminal degree. In August of 2016, I mustered all the courage and hope within me to go meet with Dr. Alan Spurgeon, head of graduate studies in the Department of Music at Ole Miss, to inquire about any possibility of finishing my degree. After looking over my resume and transcripts, Dr. Spurgeon looked across his desk at me and asked, "Can you start classes Monday?" My whole life flashed before me. as I realized that the door had just been opened for me to accomplish my dream. Bob Dreyer is a 90-year-old retired veteran who recently received his bachelor's degree from Northeastern Illinois University, and he said, "You can never have enough education," and I agree. I stand before you tonight at only 68 years of age to receive my PhD in music education. So my final words to each of you are, never give up on what is important to you. If you are in education, research, or any other human endeavor, you must be a lifelong learner, even in retirement. I close with this quote from the motivational speaker Les Brown. "Life takes on meaning when you become motivated, set goals, and charge after them in an unstoppable manner." This is exactly what we have done in preparation for this evening. So again, congratulations to each 2019 doctoral graduate.
Thank you very much to Zenithia and Martha for sharing your personal story and your inspiring words. I'd like to talk briefly about the meaning of the doctoral degree and the history. In 1972, Yale University granted the first PhD in the United States, and shortly after, the first graduate school in this country opened at Johns Hopkins University. That became the model for multiple graduate schools across the country, and it is true of ours here at the University of Mississippi. Formally organized in 1927, the University of Mississippi Graduate School has articulated critical aims, from which I will quote. "The doctoral candidate should aspire to a degree of knowledge of a given subject in order to make a contribution that is of original and independent value." These words, written over 90 years ago, still describe graduate education. Each of you has the capacity to understand great depths of knowledge in your discipline and to convey knowledge, but you also are trained as creators of knowledge, knowledge that has the potential to benefit you and society at large. With this capacity to create knowledge comes the ability to drive change. Change in your discipline, change where you live, change in the world. Thus, today, as we grant you the highest academic credential, the doctoral degree, you are now bestowed with the obligation to use your capacity to create knowledge to drive positive change. So I challenge you to become a contributor to your discipline and to society, to teach, research, innovate, practice, or create, and to do so in a way that will enrich your life and the lives of others. Certainly, the faculty who have worked with you want to see you do this. In fact, for faculty, the ultimate goal is for you to surpass what we have managed to accomplish ourselves. This is how we measure our success. And although you are no longer formal students, your mentors will continue to be mentors. Eager to hear how your personal and professional lives continue to unfold, and happy to offer advice, probably sometimes unsolicited, but offering you advice to help you reach your next goal. Each of them hopes that you will keep them informed of your successes and your setbacks. You are a part of their journey to contribute to your discipline and to society. So on behalf of the faculty mentors and the university administration, I invite you to reach out often so that we can celebrate your successes and continue to be a source of support when needed. Not long ago, one of my graduates shared with me that she loves her job, a job that would only be possible with a doctoral degree. As she described it, I quote, "I am doing exactly what I have always wanted to do." So I hope that each of you will return to your mentor and share that you love what you are doing with your doctoral degree, that you indeed as a result of all the work that led up to today, are doing what you have always wanted to do. The hooding ceremony itself commemorates the earning of the doctoral degree, and the ceremony is a symbolic ritual in which the advisor initiates the student into this highest order of scholars. The color of the hood represents different degrees and universities. The hood of the PhD is edged in blue velvet, and the hood of the EDD edged in light blue velvet. The lining reflects the university granting the degree. So you'll notice that our faculty and administrators wear hoods with a range of colors, marking their degrees in doctoral institutions. I now call forward for hooding the 2018-19 class of doctoral graduates of the University of Mississippi, along with their faculty advisors. Dr. Robert Dirksen, the Associate Dean of the Graduate School, will assist by introducing the doctoral candidates. Provost Wilkin and the Dean of each school or college will join me to congratulate the graduates. As names are read, please hold your applause so that we can hear the next name.
Okay, so first we have graduates from the College of Liberal Arts. Isis da Costa Arantes, who is getting her PhD in biological science, has a dissertation entitled Looking into the Past, the Diversification of Amphibians in the Neotropical Savannas. She will be hooded by her professor, Bryce Noonan. Henan Jonke Baske is getting a PhD in biological science for a dissertation entitled Evolution of Coral Snake Mimicry, and will be hooded by Professor Noonan. Mark Mccauley will receive the PhD in biological science for a dissertation entitled Environmental Influences on Caribbean Octocoral Symbiodiniaceae Symbiosis, and is being hooded by Professor Tamar Goulet. Stephanie Burgess will receive the PhD in biological science for a dissertation entitled Application and Refinement of Landscape Genetics for Amphibian Conservation, and has been hooded by Professor Ryan Garrick. Lauren Fuller is receiving the PhD in biological science for a dissertation entitled Description and Alleviation of the Stress Response in Sharks, and has been hooded by Professor Glenn Parsons. Jason Taylor Payne is receiving the PhD in biological science. His dissertation is entitled Bacterioplankton Biogeography of the Mississippi River Basin, and is being hooded by Professor Clifford Ox. Jared Russell Sackreiter is getting also the PhD in biological science. His dissertation is entitled The Influence of Site Connectivity on Zooplankton Assemblage Dynamics within the Lower Mississippi River Floodplain, and is being hooded by Professor Ox. Melissa Baker is getting a PhD in psychology for a dissertation entitled The Influence of Recall Instruction on the Verbal Overshadowing Effect, and is being hooded by Professor Matthew Rayson. Shrobana Ghosh is receiving the PhD, and her dissertation is entitled Gravitational Radiation from Superradiant Instabilities of Rotating Black Holes. It's being hooded by her physics professor, Luca Bombali. Alexandros Vasios Sivopoulos is receiving a PhD in economics. His dissertation is Limited Negotiation in Embedded Ultimatum Games, and is being hooded by Professor Mark Van Boning. Kwabena Okier Boating is getting the PhD in economics. His dissertation, Essays on Money and Labor, and he's being hooded by Joshua Hendrickson. Alexander Beknazarian is receiving the PhD in mathematics for his dissertation, Kramer-type moderate deviations for random fields and mutual information estimation for mixed pair random variables, hooded by Hailin Sang. Now let's pause for a minute. Let's have the hooding by the blue X from now on. See the blue X? All right. Next we have Daniel Jake Fudge. He is receiving the PhD in political science. His dissertation is The Politics of Place, the Urban-Rural Divide and Geographic Identity in American Politics. He's being hooded by Professor Jonathan Winburn. Next we have Nathan Alvin Andrew, also being hooded by Professor Winburn. His dissertation is The Distribution of Power and the Incentive to Coerce, the Effect of Shifting Power and Status Quo Evaluations on the Use of Economic Coercion between States in the International System. Sampath Asiri Bandara is receiving the PhD in physics. His dissertation is entitled Investigation of Narrow Bipolar Events in Mississippi Thunderstorms, and he will be hooded by Professor Thomas Marshall. Robert Louet is also receiving a PhD in physics. His dissertation is Acoustic Radiation Force on a Fluid-to-Fluid Boundary by Phase Plate Focused Ultrasound, and he's being hooded by Professor Joel Mobley. Aditya Pedapuram is getting the PhD in chemistry, and he will be hooded by Professor Jared Delkamp. His dissertation is entitled Organic Sensitizers for High-Efficiency Dye-Sensitized Solar Cells. Yanbing Zhang has a dissertation entitled Near-Infrared Organic Dyes for Dye-Sensitized Solar Cells and Emissive Materials Applications. She's also being hooded by Jared Delkamp and receiving the PhD in chemistry. Alexandra Baumann is receiving a PhD in chemistry. Her dissertation is Effects of Halogen Bonding and NIR Tuning of Dyes for Dye-Sensitized Solar Cells. And she's also being hooded by Professor Delkamp. Sarah Nicole Arredondo is receiving the PhD in chemistry. Her dissertation is entitled Characterization of Hydrogen Bonding to Halogen Bonding Using Computational Modeling. That should be and halogen bonding. And she is being hooded by Professor Greg Jumper. Oscar Beauchamp Black is getting the PhD in chemistry. His dissertation is entitled Physical and Chemical Trace Evidence from 3D Printed Firearms and Use of a Quadcopter for Targeted Sampling of Gaseous Mercury in the Atmosphere. And he was hooded by Professor James Cheesdale. Andrew Davis is receiving the PhD in history. His dissertation is A Bomb for the Times, The Origins and Evolution of the Lost Cause in the South Carolina Low Country, 1830 to 1876. And he will be hooded by Professor John Neff. You may want to unbutton your buttons on your hoods. Thomas Robinson has a dissertation entitled Identity, Descent, and the Roots of Georgia's Middle Class, 1848 to 1865. He is also receiving the PhD in history and being hooded by Professor Neff. Justin Isaac Rogers is receiving the PhD in history. His dissertation is entitled Constructing and Crossing Color Lines, Race and Religion in the Southern Confluence, 1810 to 1865, and he will be hooded by Professor Elizabeth Payne. Nicholas Matthew Mosvik is receiving the PhD in history. His dissertation is entitled Courtroom Wars, Constitutional Battles Over Conscription in the Civil War North, and he is being hooded by Professor April Holm. Christine Rizzi is receiving the PhD in history and also will be hooded by Professor Holm. Her dissertation is entitled My Feet Are Chained, Settler Colonialism and Mobility in the Florida Borderlands, 1812 to 1866. Laura Ellen Smith is receiving the PhD in history. Her dissertation is entitled Populism and Democratization in the Presidential Election of 1832, and she is being hooded by Professor Ann Twitty. Wei Wei Yang is receiving the PhD in chemistry. Her dissertation is entitled Electro and Photocatalytic Carbon Dioxide Reduction and Thermal Isomerization of Highly Strained Tricycle Compounds. And she is being hooded by Professor Stephen Davis and Professor Jers, who is on your right. Ebony Olivia Lumumba is receiving the PhD in English, and she will be hooded by Professor Adeteyo Alabi. Her dissertation is entitled Of Mules and Mamas, 4 Women, Africana Mothering and Resistance. Ryan Matthew Charlton will receive the PhD in English. His dissertation is entitled Alaska and the Arctic in the U.S. Imaginary, and he's being hooded by Professor Lee Ann Duck. Josh Wade Riley Dean Ferguson is receiving the PhD in English. His dissertation is entitled Rambling Blues, Mapping Contemporary North American Blues Literature, and he is being hooded by Professor Adam Stefan Gassau. Brandon Joseph Stamper is receiving the PhD in chemistry. His dissertation is about detection of sewage-eliminated drugs and metabolites, and he's being hooded by Professor Merle Godfrey. Caroline Amelia Spencer is also receiving the PhD in chemistry. Her dissertation is a computational approach to predicting and understanding new psychoactive substances for developing a database for state and federal crime laboratories and developing methods of DNA analysis for teeth samples. And she also was hooded by Professor Morale Godfrey. Dal Williams is receiving the PhD in chemistry. His dissertation is entitled Theranostics based on linear dendritic block copolymers. He is being hooded by John O'Haver on behalf of his dissertation advisor, Davida Watkins. Yolanda Rodriguez is receiving the PhD in psychology. Her dissertation is entitled, Is it Racism, Colorism, or a Pigment of Your Imagination? A Study on Skin Lightening, and she's being hooded by Professor Alan Gross. Mary Catherine Jordan is receiving the PhD in psychology. Her dissertation is entitled The Relationship of Tumor Necrosis Factor Alpha and Social Stress in Chick Anxiety and Depression Model. And she has been hooded by Professor Ken Sufka. Tanya Vandenbrink is receiving the PhD in psychology. Her dissertation is entitled Cognitive Influences on Preschoolers, Eyewitness Memory in Response to Misleading Questions. And she is being hooded by Professor Stephanie Miller. Alicia Canterbury is receiving the PhD in music. Her dissertation is entitled The Effects of Experience on Teacher Effectiveness Levels of Pre-Service Teachers, Student Teachers, and Novice Teachers. And she is being hooded by Professor Michael Worthy. Gail Simpson is receiving the PhD in music. Her dissertation is entitled Content Analysis of the Journal of Historical Research in Music Education, 1980 to 2019. And she's being hooded by Professor Alan Spurgeon. Kevin Lyle Tharp is receiving the PhD in music. His dissertation is entitled Informal Learning Methods in Traditional Balladry and American Folk Songs. He is also being hooded by Professor Spurgeon. Sarah Michelle Scott is receiving the PhD in psychology. Her dissertation is Explication of Moral Disgust, Assessing Physiological and Behavioral Responses to Disgust Eliciting Videos. And she's being hooded by Professor Danielle Mack. Also being hooded by Professor Mack is Brookley Lightsey Tynes. She is receiving the PhD in psychology. Her dissertation, Teaching Kids to Say, Ew, Parent-Child Disgust Transmission. Adam Sattler will be receiving the PhD in psychology and will be hooded by Professor John Young. His dissertation is entitled Validation of a Brief Screening Instrument for Psychopathology in Adults. Matthew Alexander Kachuk will be receiving the PhD in psychology, and his dissertation is Validating Military Culture, a confirmatory factor analysis of the military-civilian adaptation of acculturation, and he has been hooded by Professor Stefan Schulenberg. Yelena Johnson is receiving the PhD in psychology and will be hooded by Professor Todd Smitherman. Her dissertation is entitled An Exploration of Relationships Between Parenting Stress and primary headache disorders. Tanya Stephen Atkins will be receiving the PhD in psychology. Her dissertation is entitled Knowledge, Assertiveness, Competence, Using a Self-Determination Framework to Explain Sexual Satisfaction in College Students. And she's been hooded by Professor Laura Johnson. Emmy Iber will be receiving the PhD in psychology. Her dissertation is entitled Doing Hard Things in the Context of Values, and she's being hooded by Professor Kelly Wilson. That would be Emmy Aber, by the way. Next we have Emily Jacobson, who's getting the PhD in psychology, also hooded by Professor Wilson. Her dissertation is entitled A Brief ACT-Based Intervention for Distressed Graduate Students. Next we have students from the School of Engineering. The first we have is Hashim Khalid Al-Mashakbe, who is receiving the PhD in Engineering Science and will be hooded by Professor Hunayn Al-Khattab. His dissertation is entitled Decoding and Optimizing Magnesium Phosphate Binders for Additive Construction Applications. Next we have Khalil Mosab Katu, and his hooding professors are Professor Ahmed Al-Ostaz and Professor Yaqub Najjar on your right. And his dissertation is entitled Optimizing the Performance of Complex Engineering Systems Aided by Artificial Neural Networks. Bradley Thomas Goodwiller, development and use of a hydrophone-based coarse bed load monitoring surrogate for gravel bed rivers, and he's being hooded by Professor Chris Serbeck. W.H.M. Achini Kumari Harath is also receiving the PhD in Engineering Science for her dissertation entitled Application of Genetic Algorithms to Solve University Timetabling Problems Using Refined Selection and Uni-1-Point Crossover Operators. She was hooded by Professor Don Wilkins. Mina Madavi is going to be hooded by Professor Sasan Nuranian. Her dissertation is entitled Molecular Simulation of Diffusion, Loading, Carrying, and Release of Doxorubicin in Graphene and Graphene Oxide Drug Delivery Systems. Chi Liu is going to be hooded by Professor Paul Goggins. His dissertation is entitled An Improved 3D Complex Envelope 4-Stage Alternating Direction Implicit Finite Difference Time Domain by Using the Fundamental Scheme. Robert Wesley Henderson is receiving the PhD in Engineering Science and will also be hooded by Professor Goggins. His dissertation is entitled Design and Analysis of Efficient Parallel Bayesian Model Comparison Algorithms. Hussein Nadam Fadal will be hooded by Professor Leitzau, and his dissertation is entitled Raptor Codes on, where's this now? Binary input additive white Gaussian noise channels signal-to-noise ratio mismatch, and optimal inner and outer code rates. Next, we will have the School of Education. First, we have Felicia Brown Pollard. She will be receiving the Ed D in Education. She will be hooded by Professor Joel Amadon, and her dissertation is entitled Creating a Space for STEAM, Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Math. Brian Christopher Buckhalter. He will also be hooded by Professor Amadon. His dissertation is entitled An Examination of the Relationship Among the Intentions, Features, Affordances, and Outcomes of Saturday Academy for Math Professional Development for Mathematics Teachers. And he was receiving the Ed D as well. Melissa Thomas is receiving the PhD in Education. Her dissertation is entitled Virtually There, a Phenomenological Study of Secondary Students and Their Engagement with Virtual Reality Field Trips. She's being hooded by Professor Ellen Foster. Pastia Betts Garth is receiving the PhD in Education, and her dissertation is entitled Balancing Motivation, the Reading Experiences of High School Students and Their Teachers. She's being hooded by Professor Rosemary Ingham. Lane Elizabeth Maxey is receiving the PhD in Education. Her dissertation is entitled The Effects of Self-Monitoring Across General Education Settings. And she's being hooded by Professor Denise Soares. Alina Michelle Hargis is also receiving the PhD in Education. Her dissertation is The Impact of Positive Behavior Intervention and Support on Student Infractions in a Rural Alternative School. She's being hooded by Professor Soares. Tricia Michelle Gilbraith is getting an Ed D in Education. Her dissertation is Feedback in the Flipped High School STEM Classroom. She's being hooded by Professor Alan Bellman. Jennifer Lee Todd McCaskill is receiving the Ed D in Education. Her dissertation, Examining the Alternate Ranking Method for Grouping Using Mixed Ability Grouping to Enhance Learning. And she's also being hooded by Professor Bellman. Adrienne Irving Dumas is receiving the Ed D in Education. Her dissertation is a case study of a first-year teacher's implementation of short-cycle formative assessment through the use of a classroom response system and flexible grouping. And she's being hooded by Professor Bellman. Shauna Sue Hill Robinson is also getting an Ed D in Education and being hooded by Professor Bellman. Her dissertation is Daily Metacognitive Questioning Sheets, Implementing Metacognitive Strategies in the Secondary Classroom. Lavonda Kenyon White is receiving the Ed D in Education and will be hooded by Professor Bellman. Her dissertation is The Impact of Technology on the Implementation of Formative Assessment Lessons in 8th Grade Math Classrooms. Jennifer Carnes Wilson has a dissertation entitled Leading Learners to Level Up in a High School Mathematics Classroom. She's receiving the Ed D in Education and being hooded by Professor Bellman. Jason Clifton Arledge has a dissertation entitled Two-Way Street, an applied research study on the effects of increased parent and community involvement activities on student academic growth in mathematics at South Lee Middle School. And he is being hooded by Professor Douglas Davis for his Ed.D. in Education. Angela Michelle Ellison will also be hooded by Professor Davis for her Ed.D. in Education. Her dissertation is Effective Response to Intervention in Middle School. LaShonda Ross Ivory will be receiving the Ed.D. in Education and hooded by Professor Douglas Davis. Her dissertation is entitled Innovation Through Instructional Renovation, an action research study on building capacity of mathematics teachers. Valerie Ellis Barnes has a dissertation entitled Improving the Quality of Teaching in Third Grade Reading, and she will receive her Ed.D. in Education, and she's being hooded by Professor Davis. Thank you. Stephen William Havens has a dissertation entitled Improving Literacy Rates for Students with Dyslexia in a Rural School District, and he's being hooded by Professor Davis and receiving the Ed.D. in Education. Lindsay Carol Brett is receiving the Ed.D. in Education, will be hooded by Professor Davis. Her dissertation is entitled Culture Clash, an applied research study on transforming student behavioral culture in a failing school. Leanne Newton has a dissertation entitled Increasing Instructional Leadership, an applied research study on the effects of developing principals as instructional leaders in the Magnolia County School District. She's receiving her Ed.D. in Education and is being hooded by Professor Davis. Jimmy Holland Weeks has a dissertation entitled An Applied Research Study, Improving the Organization for Teacher Retention in ABC County. He's being hooded by Professor Davis and receiving the Ed.D. in Education. Stephen Jarvis Hurdle has a dissertation entitled Addressing the Disparity of Outcomes for Economically Disadvantaged Students at Central Intermediate School, an applied research study related to the development of AVID, or Advancement via Individual Determination processes. He was hooded by Professor Dennis Bunch. Amy K. Sutton is also receiving an Ed.D. in Education and is being hooded by Professor Bunch. Her dissertation is What's Going On? The Disproportionate Discipline of Upper Elementary Male Students in Little Tiger Elementary School. Craig Ellis Sasser is receiving the PhD in Higher Education. He is being hooded by Dr. Brandy Hepner-LeBlanc, and his dissertation is entitled Single Parent Success in Mississippi Community Colleges. Elizabeth Moore is receiving the Ed.D. in Education, and she will be hooded by Professor Neil Hutchins. Institutional factors that affect transfer student success at a university in the Mid-South region of the U.S. is the topic of her companion dissertation. And next we have Patricia Ann Coates. She's also receiving the Ed.D. in Education and being hooded by Professor Neil Hutchins. And she is the one with the companion dissertation with the previous student. So I won't read the title again. No, I will. Institutional factors that affect transfer student success at a university in the Mid-South region of the U.S. Next we have LaShawn Fluker-Brooks. She is receiving the Ed.D. in Education and being hooded by Professor Hutchins. Her dissertation is Predictive Variables that Influence Student Success of First-Time Freshman Students at Mississippi Valley State University. Sarah Mattox Holt has a dissertation entitled The Impact of Blended Classroom Pedagogy on Student GPA in a Community College STEM course. She's also being hooded by Professor Hutchins. Teresa Bishop Hargett has a dissertation entitled Associate's Degree in Nursing, Student Success, Perceptions and Personal Strategies of Successful Third Semester Nursing Students about Retention Interventions. She's being hooded by Professors Carrie Millier and Macy Edmondson. Excuse me. Rachel Johnson is receiving the Ed.D. in Education and is being hooded by Professor Millier, and for a dissertation entitled Writing Center Consultations as Experiences Socioacademic Integrative, Writing Center Consultations as Socioacademic Integrative Experiences for Community College Transfer Students. Next we have Stacy Smith Walker, receiving an Ed.D. in Education, being hooded by Professor Millier, for a dissertation entitled Effectiveness of Student Support Initiatives to Alleviate the Student Loan Debt Crisis. Clayt Holloman has a dissertation entitled Exploring the Relationship Between Participation in Financial Literacy and Persistence Programming and Student Success among First-Generation College Students, and is also being hooded by Professor Millier, receiving an Ed.D. in Education. Kevin Alexander Russell has a dissertation entitled Relationship of Expected Family Contribution to Student Success at Belhaven University, and he is receiving the Ed.D. in Education and being hooded by Professor Millier. Shambhoda Deanne Mead, she is receiving the Ed.D. in Education and being hooded by Professor Amy Wells Dolan and Laura Antonow. Her dissertation, Find the Most Here, the Academic Success of First-Year African American Students at the University of Mississippi. Earl Presley, also known as EJ, will be receiving the Ed.D. in Education. His dissertation, Find the Most Here, the Academic Success of First-Year African American Students at the University of Mississippi. And he is being hooded by the same two professors. Next we have Alexandria Shanae White. Her dissertation is similarly titled, Find the Most Here, the Academic Success of First-Year African American Students at the University of Mississippi. And she is being hooded by the same two professors, Amy Wells Dolan and Laura Antonow. Professor Amy Wells Dolan will continue, and the next student is Mariana Rengel Alushuski. She is receiving the PhD in Higher Education. Her dissertation is entitled a study of contingent faculty representation in governance at the University of Mississippi. Scott Weldon Kilpatrick is receiving a PhD in higher education with a dissertation entitled Visualizing the Future, Work-Integrated Learning, and the Psychosocial and Professional Development of Undergraduates. The hooding professor is Professor Amy Wells-Dolan. Anthony Vukasic is receiving the Ed.D. in Education with a dissertation entitled Perceptions of Role Conflict and Role Ambiguity Among Fraternity and Sorority Advising Professionals. Kimberly Renee Willis has a dissertation entitled African Americans in Physical Therapy, Enhancing Diversity, and is receiving the Ed.D. in Education and being hooded by Professor Wells-Dolan. Ryan Lowry Upshaw has a dissertation entitled Enhancing the Retention of African American Students in the School of Engineering at the University of Mississippi, and is receiving his Ed.D. in Education and being hooded by Professor Wells-Dolan. Detarian Lavon Shackelford is receiving the Ed.D. in Education and is being hooded by Professor John Holloman. His dissertation is entitled Former African American Male Football Student Athletes at Southeastern Conference Institutions and Their Transition from Athletics to Non-Athletic Careers. Jennifer Lynn Parsons has a dissertation entitled African Americans and the Honors College Experience at the University of Mississippi, and is receiving the Ed.D. in Education and also being hooded by Professor Holloman. Audra Turnavec has a dissertation entitled Differences in Customer-to-Customer Participant Characteristics. What can they tell us? And is receiving an Ed.D. in Education. Next we have the School of Pharmacy. First we have Sasikaran Nana, who is receiving the PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences and will be hooded by Professor E. Young for a dissertation entitled End-of-Life Costs in Medicare Beneficiaries with Parkinson's Disease. Tristan Harmon Jackson, The Effect of Medicare Star Ratings on Pharmacy, an evaluation of health plan strategies, pharmacist attitudes, and financial impact on retail stores. He is being hooded by Professor Benjamin Franklin Danahan. Nilesh Gangan is receiving the PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences. He is to be hooded by Professor John Bentley and Megan Rosenthal for a dissertation entitled Testing a Modified Model of Stress Process for Understanding Quality of Life Among Informal Caregivers and Assessing Their Formal Service Use. Nicholas Johnston Keeling will be hooded by the same faculty members for a dissertation entitled A Sustainable Future for Clinical Pharmacogenomics. Ashley Stubblefield-Crumby will receive the PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences and will be hooded by Professor Alicia Bolden for a dissertation entitled Valuation of Mentorship in Pharmacy Education and the Impact of Perceived Personal Relevance. Purnendu Sharma will receive the PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences and is being hooded by Professor Murthy, we call him, for a dissertation entitled Impact of Quality Attributes of Topical Products on Their Performance. Ajinkya Mureshwar Bagurkar has a dissertation entitled Novel Applications of Hot Melt Extrusion Technology and is being hooded by Professor Michael Repka. Nicole Savia Mendonça, who will also be hooded by Professor Repka, for a dissertation entitled Novel Applications of Hot Melt Extrusion Technology in Transbuccal and Topical Drug Delivery Systems. Jiashang Jiang will receive the PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences for a dissertation entitled Novel Application of Melt Extrusion and Additive Manufacturing on Developing Diverse Dosages, and is being hooded by Professor Repka. Anvo is receiving the PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences for a dissertation entitled Approaches to Narrow Absorption Window Drugs Using Hot Melt Extrusion Technology, and is being hooded by Professor Michael Repka. Karthik Yadav Janga has a dissertation entitled Formulation Strategies to Address Physiological and Anatomical Constraints for Improved Topical Ocular Drug Delivery, and is being hooded by Professor Sumyajit Majumdar. Akshaya Tatke is also being hooded by Professor Majumdar for a dissertation entitled Development and Evaluation of Topical Formulation Designs for Improved Drug Delivery to Posterior Ocular Tissue. Preet Lakhani has a dissertation entitled Amphotericin B Nanolipid Carriers for Ocular Drug Delivery and is being hooded by Professor Majumdar, also receiving the PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences. Pranjal Samir Taskar has a dissertation entitled Formulation Development, Preclinical Testing, and Primary Packaging Optimization for Cannabinoids and Other Therapeutics. It is being hooded by Professor Majumdar, receiving a PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences. Omar Ibrahim Fantouk is receiving the PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences, is being hooded by Professor Ikhlas Khan, and his dissertation is entitled Safety Assessment and Chemical Fingerprinting Analysis of Medicinal Plants Commonly Consumed as Herbal Teas. Including rooibos and moringa. Next we have Abida Parveen, also to be hooded by Professor Khan. Her dissertation is entitled Comparative Assessment of Safety and Quality of Tinospora Species, Tinospora crispa and Tinospora sinensis. Next, we have candidates from the School of Business. James Frank Ball, Jr. will be receiving the PhD in Business Administration and will be hooded by Professor Brian Reifel for a dissertation entitled Hitting the Bullseye, the Influence of Technical Debt on the Accuracy of Effort Estimation in Agile Projects. Thanks. Justin Cox will be hooded by Professor Robert Van Ness, and his dissertation is The Effects of Market Fragmentation Around Corporate Events. Julian will be receiving the PhD in Business Administration for a dissertation entitled Innovation, CEOs, and IPOs, and will be hooded by Professor Kathleen Fuller. Derek Orion Essel will be receiving the PhD in Business Administration for a dissertation entitled Influencing Consumer Well-Being, Creating a Typology and Examining Voluntary Simplicity. Is being hooded by Professor Scott Vitale. Jr. Franklin Tillman will also be hooded by Professor Vitale, Jr. An examination of the emotional aspects of ethical decision-making, the impact of self-control, religiosity, and moral potency. Eric Markin is receiving the PhD in Business Administration and will be hooded by Professor Hyun-Soo Woo for a dissertation entitled Ownership Conversion as a Solution for Ex-Post Agency Problems, the Case of Franchising. Gabrielle Schwab will be hooded by Professor Paul Johnson, and this is for a dissertation entitled Social Cognitive Theory as a Framework for Understanding the Relationship Between Competition and Cooperation, three essays of emerging cooperation and entrepreneurial team outcomes. That was a new word to me, coopetition. Next we have the Patterson School of Accountancy. Emily Catherine Hornock will be receiving the PhD in Accountancy and will be hooded by Professor Kendall Bolin for a dissertation entitled The Effect of Auditors' Informal Communication in the Audit Environment on Financial Reporting Outcomes. Next we have the School of Applied Sciences. Lois Coleman will be receiving the PhD in Health and Kinesiology for a dissertation entitled Cultural Influences on Body Size Ideals Among African American Women in the Mississippi Delta, and will be hooded by Professor Martha Ann Bass. Paul Tyler Donahue has a dissertation entitled Jumping to Conclusions, the Effects of Hydration Status on Kinetics and Electromyography in the Vertical Jump. And he's been hooded by Professor John Garner, also for a PhD in Health and Kinesiology. Christopher Mark Hill will be hooded by Professor Alberto Del Arco for a dissertation entitled Reward and Punishment, the Neural Correlates of Reinforcement Feedback During Motor Learning. That's also for a PhD in Health and Kinesiology, as is Scott Dankel, who will be hooded by Professor Jeremy Leneke for a dissertation entitled, Do Individual Responders to Resistance Exercise Exist to an Extent That Can Be Detected Beyond That of Measurement Error, Random Biological Variability? Emily Frith will receive the PhD in Health and Kinesiology for a dissertation entitled Additive Effects of Priming and Acute Exercise on Convergent Creativity. It will be hooded by Professor Paul Loprinzi. And finally, we have our two class marshals. First, Zenithia Joyce Barnett. She will be hooded by Professor Clifford Ox. Her PhD in biological science is on the effects of impoundments on the community assemblage and gene flow of stream crayfishes. And finally, Martha Frances Monroe will receive the PhD in music. She will be hooded by Professor Alan Spurgeon, and her dissertation is a descriptive study of the Faber series piano adventures and its implications for piano pedagogy. Let's have a big round of applause for all of our graduates.
Thank you, everyone, and congratulations to all of our doctoral students. We also typically cover a few awards related to the graduate school during the hooding ceremony. The first of which relates to graduate students performing a different role than what normally brings them to campus. That is, our graduate students play an important part in the education of our undergraduate students, even though their principal role on campus is being a student themselves. As such, it is fitting that we recognize the contribution of our graduate instructors to our educational enterprise with an award. I call to the podium Dr. Bob Cummings, Executive Director of Academic Innovation and Associate Professor of Writing and Rhetoric, to introduce the award winner.
I'm happy to present the Graduate Instructor Excellence in Teaching Award. The award was established to highlight the importance of the teaching role performed by graduate students. It recognizes exemplary teaching by a currently enrolled graduate student who serves as an instructor at the University of Mississippi. The award is sponsored by the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning with the support of the Office of the Provost, the Graduate School, and Dr. Johnny Lott, Emeritus Director of the CETL. In nominating the recipient for the award, his recommender noted that he reverses students' disinterest in a difficult topic area, taxes. He dedicates time to ensuring student learning, and he approached the course in an innovative manner by recording himself working homework problems to help students who were then encouraged to rework the problems until they had mastered them. The Center for Excellence Teaching and Learning 2019 Graduate Instructor Excellence in Teaching Award recipient is Joshua Seimer. Joshua, would you come?
The Graduate School is deeply committed to promoting diversity and inclusivity in our student body and academic programs. Several years ago, the Graduate School and Graduate Student Council created an award to recognize an individual or program that best exemplifies the ideals of enhancing inclusiveness in graduate education. The first recipient of this award was Dr. Donald Cole. Recently, upon his retirement, the award was renamed as the Donald R. Cole Excellence in Promoting Inclusiveness in Graduate Education Award. And this was done to recognize Dr. Cole's long-standing commitment to inclusive excellence and extensive contributions to the graduate school and graduate education here at the University of Mississippi. I call to the podium Dr. Donald Cole, Assistant Provost Emeritus, to introduce this year's recipient.
This year, the selection committee chooses to honor a departmental program that illustrates the fact that an intentional effort combined with a conscientious desire can yield diversity results much sooner than we can imagine. I would ask a representative from the Masters of Criminal Justice program to come forward to receive this award on behalf of that department. In particular, if Dr. Kimberly Kaiser and Dr. Linda Keener are present, I'd love to have them on the stage. I would also ask that Provost Wilkins and the Graduate School Dean Clark come forward with the presentation of this award from the graduate school and the university, if you will. In its application, the Masters of Criminal Justice program noted, and I quote, "The sincere efforts of the department to promote and actively strive to create an inclusive environment for our diverse student body, a program built to last." The program supports the application with examples and convincing data highlighted by dedication to inclusiveness of minority and women graduate students, improving the culture of the department, enhancing the diversity of the faculty, improving diversity discussions in the curriculum. Just a few years ago, the graduate program in criminal justice was a relatively homogeneous program ravaged with problems and complaints that stagnated both their growth and prominence. With the introduction of new caring and progressive leadership, we're witnessing a resurgence that could be a model for the whole university in terms of boldness. Provost Wilkins, it was my pleasure to read letters from the department, as well as to personally interview faculty members from that department and query them about their program's rapid progress toward diversity. Here are some findings. Says one student with an alternative lifestyle, "The opportunity to interact with diverse peers leads me to greater active thinking, intellectual engagement, and motivations." Music to the academician. Another out-of-state student with a foreign-sounding name who was reluctant to attend the university writes, "The administration in the MCJ program made proactive efforts to develop an environment that I felt safe to express myself in and grow a variety in capacities." But Dean Clark, I believe that it was my interview with the faculty members that yet resonates with me, that I felt a sincere compassion toward their efforts, that I give in the following quote from them. "Problems we had were not unique to this department or to the university, but seem more substantial given the subject matter of our program." And I reflected upon that quote, our program. Criminal justice. Criminal justice. Criminal justice. Dr. Kaiser, Dr. Keener, and members of the Masters of Criminal Justice program, congratulations on receiving this award, And thank you for all the work that you've done in diversity and inclusion for our university. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2018-19 academic year winner of the Graduate School's Down Cold Diversity Award, the Master's of Program in Criminal Justice. Let's recognize them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. Typically during the hooding ceremony, we also recognize the winner of the University Award for Excellence in Graduate Teaching and Mentoring. The individual that won this award this year is not able to be here tonight, but I am pleased to inform you that Professor Beth Ann Fennelly of the Department of English was the 2019 winner. Professor Fennelly has directed 32 Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing theses and has been a leader of that program. A student recommender stated, "The mark of a great teacher is one who continues to teach long after the books are closed and the grades are in." Every time I sit down to write, her varied and sage advice runs through my mind like a mantra. Let's have a round of applause for Professor Fennelly. Before we conclude this evening's ceremony, I want to thank the staff of the graduate school. They helped with logistics, balancing some new challenges around space that we were anticipating, and they worked to ensure a successful ceremony today. Please join me in thanking them. So now's the part where I have just a few reminders for everyone. First, I remind you that the morning commencement ceremony will be at 9:30 a.m. in the pavilion. For anyone that has not heard, we're in the pavilion. We encourage our doctoral students to proudly wear their hoods and sit in the front row spot within the pavilion. Second, on the mezzanine level, we have a nice banner that would be a wonderful spot for photographs with advisors and doctoral students that have graduated, family, friends. I share that because we're going to ask you to, we've been asked to clear out the auditorium pretty quickly. And so there are wonderful spaces outside of here to take wonderful pictures, so I encourage you to take advantage of those. Now, will the doctoral class of 2018-2019 please rise and face the audience? Let's continue congratulating them as they process to the main lobby. Congratulations.
Excellent job. 905.